Dr. Vincent Vale leaned back in his chair, gazing out the window of his office as he reflected on the patterns he'd seen in his years of practice. There was one story in particular that stood out, one he often thought about when discussing the dangerous link between perfectionism and fear of failure. He began narrating the story. Her name was Anna, and from the outside, she was everything society told us we should aspire to be: successful, polished, and always put together. But on the inside, Anna was fighting a battle she thought she couldn't win. Anna was a 30-year-old marketing executive living in the heart of New York City. She had worked her way up from intern to department lead at one of the most prestigious advertising firms in Manhattan. Her colleagues admired her boss relied on her, and her friends often envied her lifestyle. Yet none of that mattered to Anna, because no matter how much she achieved, it never felt like enough. She was always chasing an impossible standard of perfection, terrified of making even the smallest mistake. Dr. Vale explained, perfectionism is a silent thief. It sneaks in under the guise of high standards and ambition, but it doesn't stop there. It demands more and more until it robs you of your confidence, your joy, and sometimes even your health. For Anna, perfectionism had stolen her peace of mind. Each day began the same for Anna. She would wake up at 5 a.m., already running through the tasks ahead of her. Before even getting out of bed, she'd feel a knot of anxiety in her chest, tightening with every item on her mental to-do list. By the time she arrived at the office, her mind was a whirlwind of overthinking and second-guessing. Every email she sent, every report she submitted, every meeting she led was carefully curated, revised and scrutinized to ensure there were no mistakes. At first glance, her perfectionism seemed to pay off. Anna's projects were always flawless, her presentations captivating, and her attention to detail unmatched. But the cost of that perfection was mounting. She was working late nights, skipping meals and losing sleep, all in the name of maintaining her spotless reputation. And no one knew, because Anna never let them see the cracks in her facade. Dr. Vale described how Anna's fear of failure dictated her every move. She believed that if she could just be perfect, she could avoid criticism, rejection, and disappointment. But the truth is, perfectionism doesn't protect you from failure. It makes you a prisoner of your own fear. The turning point for Anna came one Monday morning when her boss assigned her a high-stakes campaign for one of their biggest clients. It was an opportunity to showcase her skills on a national stage, something Anna had dreamed of since she entered the industry. But instead of excitement, Anna felt a wave of dread. What if she couldn't deliver? What if her ideas weren't good enough? What if this project revealed her as the fraud she secretly believed herself to be? For the next 2 weeks, Anna struggled to even start the project. She spent hours brainstorming, but nothing felt good enough to put on paper. The longer she delayed, the worse her anxiety grew. She avoided her boss's emails, made excuses for missed deadlines, and even considered asking to be reassigned. She told herself, if I can't do it perfectly, maybe I shouldn't do it at all. By the end of the second week, Anna hit a breaking point. Sitting in her office late one night, staring at a blank screen, she realized she couldn't keep living like this. The perfectionism that had once driven her to succeed was now threatening to derail her career and her sanity. That's when she decided to seek help. Dr. Vale shared what happened next. When Anna first walked into my office, she looked like someone who had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her polished appearance couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes or the tension in her voice. I feel like I'm drowning, she said. No matter how hard I try, it's never enough. As Anna began to open up, Dr. Vale saw the familiar patterns of perfectionism intertwined with a deep fear of failure. Her need to be perfect wasn't about excellence, it was about protection. Perfectionism was Anna's shield, her way of avoiding vulnerability and rejection. But that shield had become too heavy to bear. Perfectionism is about control, Dr. Vale told her. But life isn't something you can control. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of mistakes. And that's okay. The key isn't to be perfect, it's to learn to let go. As Anna sat in Dr. Vale's office, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse, she tried to explain the chaos inside her mind. Words spilled out in fragments, each one carrying the weight of her frustration and fear. "I just don't understand it," she began. "I have all these opportunities, things I've worked so hard for, but instead of feeling excited, I feel paralyzed. I can't stop thinking about what could go wrong. It's like my brain won't let me move forward until I'm sure everything will be perfect." "And that never happens." Dr. Vale leaned forward slightly, his calm presence encouraging her to continue. "What happens when you start a task? Can you describe that moment?" Anna paused, considering the question. "It's like my mind races. I start picturing all the ways it could go wrong. I think about what people will say if I mess up, how embarrassed I'll feel if I fail. It's overwhelming. So instead of starting, I do other things that feel safer." "What kind of things?" Dr. Vale asked. "Anything but the work I'm supposed to be doing," Anna admitted with a nervous laugh. "I'll organize my desk, check my email, scroll through Instagram for inspiration. I tell myself I'll start after just one more thing, but then hours go by and I've done nothing. And the whole time, I'm beating myself up for wasting time." Dr. Vale nodded thoughtfully. "That's a common pattern," he said. "Perfectionism and fear of failure often lead to avoidance. Your brain is trying to protect you from the discomfort of making a mistake, so it convinces you to focus on easier, less risky tasks. But the longer you avoid, the more your anxiety grows." Anna sighed. "It's exhausting. I feel like I'm constantly running, but never getting anywhere. And the worst part is, no one knows. My friends think I have it all together. My boss thinks I'm this high achiever. If they knew how much I struggle just to send an email, they'd think I'm a fraud." "That's the burden of perfectionism," Dr. Vale said gently. "It creates a facade of success while hiding the fear and doubt underneath. But let me ask you this. What are you afraid will happen if you're not perfect?" Anna's eyes darted to the floor. "I guess I'm afraid people will see me differently. Like I'm not as capable as they think. I've worked so hard to get where I am, but sometimes I feel like I don't deserve it, like it's only a matter of time before I mess up and lose everything." Dr. Vale recognized the signs of imposter syndrome woven into Anna's perfectionism. "It sounds like you're carrying a lot of pressure to maintain this image of yourself," he said. "But that pressure isn't sustainable. The more you try to avoid failure, the more you deprive yourself of the chance to grow. Mistakes aren't the opposite of success. They're part of the process." Anna frowned, her skepticism evident. "But what if I make a mistake and it ruins everything? I can't afford to fail." Dr. Vale leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. "Let's reframe that fear. What if making a mistake didn't mean you failed? What if it meant you learned something? What if it brought you closer to success?" The question lingered in the air, challenging Anna's deeply held beliefs. She wanted to believe what Dr. Vale was saying, but years of equating mistakes with failure had left a lasting imprint. Still, she couldn't deny the truth in his words. Her perfectionism wasn't helping her. It was holding her back. Over the next few sessions, Anna and Dr. Vale worked together to identify the behaviors that were perpetuating her struggles. One of the first things they addressed was her tendency to over-prepare. "I'll spend hours researching and planning, but I never feel ready," Anna confessed. "It's like no amount of preparation is ever enough." Dr. Vale helped Anna see how her over-preparation was another form of avoidance. "It's your way of delaying the risk of starting," he explained. "The key is to set limits. Give yourself a reasonable amount of time to plan, and then commit to taking action." They also explored Anna's habit of overthinking. She would replay conversations in her head, obsessing over what she could have said differently. "It's exhausting," she admitted, "but I can't seem to turn it off." To help her break this cycle, Dr. Vale introduced mindfulness exercises. "When your thoughts start to spiral, try grounding yourself in the present moment," he suggested. "Focus on what you can do now, not what you should have done in the past or what might happen in the future." Though the changes were gradual, Anna began to notice a shift. She started setting boundaries with her work, giving herself permission to step away from tasks that didn't require her immediate attention. She began celebrating small victories, like sending an email without rereading it 10 times. And for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could break free from the grip of perfectionism. But her biggest challenge was still ahead. Anna's breaking point came during a late night at the office, sitting alone in the glow of her computer screen. She had a presentation due the next morning for a major client, one that could either solidify her reputation as a top performer or, in her mind, expose her as a fraud. Her heart raced as she stared at the slides she'd already reworked a dozen times. Each edit felt worse than the last. The fear of getting it wrong was paralyzing. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't just about the presentation. It was the mounting pressure she felt in every corner of her life. She was tired. Tired of striving, tired of pretending, tired of feeling like nothing she did was ever good enough. The next morning she made a decision. Instead of heading straight to the office, Anna searched for a therapist. She scrolled through profiles online, looking for someone who might understand what she was going through. That's when she came across Dr. Vincent Vale. His bio resonated with her in a way others hadn't. Perfectionism isn't about excellence, it's about fear. Together, we'll uncover what's holding you back and find a path forward. It was as if he was speaking directly to her. Without giving herself time to overthink it, Anna booked an appointment. 2 days later, she found herself sitting in Dr. Vale's office, nervous but determined to find help. Dr. Vale greeted her warmly, his calm demeanor immediately putting her at ease. His office was inviting, with soft lighting, shelves lined with books, and a small potted plant on his desk. As Anna settled into the chair, she felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. She had spent so long holding it all together, and now she was about to let someone see the cracks. "I'm glad you're here, Anna," Dr. Vale began, his voice steady and reassuring. "Tell me what brought you in today." Anna hesitated, unsure where to start. Finally, she said, "I guess I just feel stuck. I've always been a high achiever, but lately it feels like no matter how hard I try, it's not enough. I'm constantly worried about failing, and it's exhausting. I can't keep living like this." Dr. Vale nodded, listening intently. "It sounds like you're carrying a lot of pressure," he said. "Can you tell me more about where that fear of failure comes from?" As Anna began to unpack her story, the pieces started to fall into place. She described growing up in a family where success was celebrated, but mistakes were met with criticism. "If I got a 98 on a test, my dad would ask why it wasn't 100, she said. "I learned early on that being good wasn't enough. I had to be perfect." Dr. Vale leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "And what happens now when you feel like you're not perfect?" Anna swallowed hard. "I shut down," she admitted. "I overthink everything, trying to make it perfect, but it just makes me more anxious. Sometimes I avoid things altogether because I'm so afraid of getting it wrong." "That's a common response," Dr. Vale said. "Perfectionism and fear of failure often go hand in hand. Your perfectionism is trying to protect you from the pain of failure, but in doing so, it's keeping you from moving forward." Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, someone had put into words what she had been feeling for years. Her perfectionism wasn't helping her. It was hurting her. Dr. Vale continued, "The good news is, this isn't something you have to live with forever. With time and effort, you can learn to challenge those patterns and reframe the way you think about failure." Over the next few sessions, Anna and Dr. Vale worked to uncover the deeper roots of her perfectionism. They explored how her fear of failure was tied to her self-worth and how she had learned to equate mistakes with inadequacy. "You're not alone in this," Dr. Vale reassured her. "Many people struggle with the same beliefs, but those beliefs aren't facts. They're just stories your mind has told you." One of the first exercises Dr. Vale gave Anna was to write down her thoughts, whenever she felt anxious about a task. "Don't censor yourself," he said. "Just write what comes to mind, even if it feels irrational." When Anna brought her notes to their next session, they worked together to challenge those thoughts. For example, one of her recurring fears was, "If I make a mistake, people will think I'm incompetent." Dr. Vale helped her break it down. "Has that ever happened? And even if someone did think that, would it mean you're actually incompetent, or would it mean they misunderstood your value?" Over time, Anna began to see how her perfectionism was based on assumptions rather than reality. She started practicing self-compassion, reminding herself that she was human and that mistakes were part of growth. Each small step felt like a victory. As Dr. Vale reflected on their sessions, he saw a transformation beginning to take shape. Anna wasn't just learning to let go of perfectionism, she was reclaiming her sense of self. And though the journey wasn't over, she was finally moving forward. Anna walked into her session with Dr. Vale one morning. A small but noticeable change in her demeanor. Her shoulders weren't as tense, and her steps were less hesitant. She smiled faintly as she took her seat across from him, a sign of the quiet progress she had been making. "So," Dr. Vale began, leaning forward slightly, "how was your week?" "It was different," Anna replied, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "I tried some of the things we talked about, and I think they actually helped." Dr. Vale nodded, encouraging her to elaborate. "For one, I didn't overthink every email I sent," Anna continued. "I told myself it didn't have to be perfect, just clear and professional. At first it was really uncomfortable, but then I realized that nothing bad happened. In fact, my boss even complimented me on how quickly I responded to a client." Dr. Vale smiled. "That's a great step forward," he said. "You're learning to trust yourself." The session continued with Anna describing other small victories. She had started using the technique they'd discussed, breaking tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. Instead of looking at her overwhelming to-do list and shutting down, she focused on one item at a time, giving herself permission to stop after completing it. "Most of the time, I didn't even want to stop," she said. "Once I got started, the anxiety wasn't as bad as I thought it would be." "That's the power of momentum," Dr. Vale explained. "Anxiety often feels overwhelming when you're standing still, but action, even small steps, can reduce its hold on you. It's like stepping into a cold pool. The anticipation is worse than the reality." One of the most transformative moments for Anna came when they addressed her perfectionism directly. Dr. Vale introduced an exercise called the Imperfect Action Plan. The idea was simple but radical for someone like Anna. Choose one task each day and deliberately do it imperfectly. The goal wasn't to sabotage her work, but to challenge her fear of imperfection. At first, Anna balked at the idea. "You want me to make mistakes on purpose?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes," Dr. Vale replied with a reassuring smile, "because the world won't end if you do. It's a way of proving to yourself that mistakes are survivable and even valuable." Her first attempt was terrifying. Anna chose a routine internal report that wasn't client-facing and allowed herself to leave minor details unfinished. She submitted it before triple-checking every line, fully expecting to receive criticism. Instead, her manager barely noticed and even thanked her for the quick turnaround. "It was eye-opening," Anna admitted in her next session. "I realized I was putting all this pressure on myself for no reason. No one else expects me to be perfect. It was all in my head." Over time, Anna began to see failure in a new light. With Dr. Vale's guidance, she reframed her mistakes as opportunities to learn rather than evidence of inadequacy. When she missed a deadline for a small task, instead of spiraling into guilt, she reviewed what went wrong and adjusted her schedule for the next project. "It felt good to treat it like a problem to solve instead of a disaster," she said. Anna also started practicing self-compassion, a concept that had initially felt foreign to her. Dr. Vale taught her to challenge her inner critic by imagining what she would say to a close friend in the same situation. "You wouldn't call your friend a failure for missing a deadline," he pointed out. So why do you say that to yourself? The turning point in Anna's transformation came when her boss offered her a leadership role on a high-profile campaign. In the past, she would have declined out of fear that she couldn't handle the pressure. But this time, she said yes. "I'm not going to lie," Anna told Dr. Vale. "I was scared. But instead of letting that fear stop me, I used it as motivation to prepare. I told myself I didn't have to get everything right. I just had to give it my best." The project wasn't without challenges. There were moments when Anna felt the familiar pull of overthinking and perfectionism, but she used the tools she had learned in therapy, breaking tasks into smaller steps, focusing on progress over perfection, and showing herself kindness when things didn't go as planned. By the time the campaign launched, Anna felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. "I realized something important," Anna said in one of her final sessions with Dr. Vale. "Perfection isn't the goal. It's a trap. What matters is showing up, trying, and learning along the way. That's how I want to live from now on." Dr. Vale smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "You've come a long way, Anna," he said. "And the best part is, this is just the beginning." As Anna left the office that day, she felt lighter, not because her perfectionism had vanished entirely, but because she no longer let it control her. She had learned to embrace imperfection, face her fears, and trust herself. And in doing so, she had found the freedom she had been searching for all along. Anna stared at her computer screen, her heart pounding. The email sitting in her inbox was an opportunity she had been waiting for her entire career, the chance to lead a national advertising campaign for one of the firm's largest clients. It was the kind of project that could set her apart as a top creative leader in the industry. Yet, as she read the email for the third time, her hands trembled. The fear began creeping in, as it always did. What if I can't do this? What if I fail and everyone sees I'm not good enough? Her perfectionism kicked into high gear, replaying every worst-case scenario in her mind. She imagined her ideas being rejected, her team resenting her, and her boss regretting his decision to put her in charge. She almost closed the email without replying. A voice in her head whispered, "If you don't accept, you can't fail." But another voice, a quieter, stronger one, reminded her of everything she had worked on with Dr. Vale. She took a deep breath and repeated one of the affirmations he had taught her. "I don't have to be perfect. I just have to begin." Anna clicked reply and typed 2 words, "I'm in." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The following week, as she met with the team for the first time, Anna felt the familiar tension in her chest. The pressure to deliver a flawless campaign weighed heavily on her, but this time she approached it differently. Instead of micromanaging every detail, a habit that had alienated her colleagues in the past, she delegated responsibilities and trusted her team to handle their parts. She reminded herself that she didn't have to do everything alone. Still, the road wasn't without bumps. During the first brainstorming session, Anna presented her initial concept, only to be met with lukewarm responses. In the past, she might have taken this as a sign of failure, shutting down or retreating into endless revisions to fix the idea. But now, she viewed the feedback as a chance to grow. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "Let's talk about what's not working and how we can make it better." Her openness surprised her team and herself. As they worked together to refine the concept, Anna began to see the power of collaboration. By letting go of her need to control every detail, she allowed others to contribute their ideas, which ultimately made the campaign stronger. A major turning point came 2 weeks before the launch. The team had just completed a critical draft of the campaign when a technical glitch caused them to lose hours of work. The room erupted in frustration, and Anna felt the familiar panic rising. "This is it," she thought. "This is where it all falls apart." But instead of spiraling, she took a moment to ground herself, using the mindfulness techniques she had practiced with Dr. Vale. "Okay, let's regroup," she said, her voice steady. "We still have time to fix this, and we'll do it together." Her calm response set the tone for the rest of the team. They got back to work, and by the end of the day, they had rebuilt most of what had been lost. One of her colleagues pulled her aside afterward and said, "I've never seen you so composed under pressure. It's inspiring." Anna reflected on those words during her next session with Dr. Vale. "In the past, something like that would have derailed me," she admitted. "I would have seen it as proof that I wasn't good enough, but now I realize that setbacks don't define me. They're just part of the process." As the launch date approached, Anna faced her final challenge, presenting the campaign to the client. Standing in the boardroom, surrounded by executives, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. But instead of letting them control her, she embraced them. "Nerves mean I care," she reminded herself, "and caring is a strength." Her presentation wasn't perfect. She stumbled over a few words and had to pause once to collect her thoughts. But the client's response was overwhelmingly positive. They loved the campaign and praised Anna for her leadership and creativity. For the first time, Anna felt not just relief, but pride. She had faced her fears, and even when things hadn't gone perfectly, she had persevered. In her next session, she shared the news with Dr. Vale. "It wasn't perfect," she said, smiling, "but it was enough, and I was enough." Dr. Vale nodded, a look of pride on his face. "That's the lesson," he said. "Perfection isn't the goal. It never was. The goal is to show up, to try, and to grow, and you've done all of that." For Anna, the campaign was more than just a professional success. It was a personal victory, proof that she could confront her fear of failure and come out stronger on the other side. As she walked out of Dr. Vale's office that day, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. She knew the fear would still show up from time to time, but now she had the tools to face it and the confidence to believe in herself. Dr. Vincent Vale sat quietly in his office, reflecting on Anna's journey. Stories like hers were the reason he had chosen this work, to witness the transformation of people weighed down by fear and self-doubt into individuals who learned to trust their resilience. He turned to his journal, where he often recorded the lessons his patients' journeys taught him. Today, he wrote a single phrase at the top of the page: "Perfectionism isn't the pursuit of excellence, it's the avoidance of vulnerability." Anna's story was a testament to this truth. When she first walked into his office, she was a textbook perfectionist, sharp, driven, and outwardly successful, yet inwardly battling the crippling fear of failure. Her perfectionism hadn't been about striving for greatness. It had been about avoiding the possibility of being seen as anything less than perfect. Dr. Vale remembered their first few sessions, where Anna described the constant pressure she felt to meet impossibly high standards. She was running herself into the ground, trying to avoid criticism, rejection, and even her own self-judgment. Her fear of failure wasn't just a passing concern, it was a lens through which she viewed every aspect of her life. "Fear has a way of disguising itself," Dr. Vale reflected, thinking back to one of their early conversations. "It convinces you that the only way to be safe is to be perfect. But the reality is, perfectionism is a trap. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of overthinking and avoidance, stealing your time, energy, and joy." Anna's transformation began when she started to challenge that fear. Dr. Vale had guided her to see that perfectionism wasn't protecting her, it was imprisoning her. Together, they uncovered the roots of her beliefs, tracing them back to moments in her childhood where mistakes had been met with criticism instead of encouragement. Those experiences had taught Anna to equate failure with worthlessness, a connection that had shaped her adult life in profound ways. "Unraveling those beliefs is never easy," Dr. Vale mused. "It requires courage, the courage to face your fears, challenge your assumptions, and take risks." And that's exactly what Anna did. He thought about the pivotal moments in Anna's journey, like the day she accepted the leadership role for the national campaign. It had been a turning point, not just professionally but personally. For Anna, saying yes to that opportunity had meant stepping into the unknown, embracing the possibility of failure, and trusting herself to figure it out along the way. She taught herself to focus on progress, not perfection, Dr. Vale noted, and in doing so, she discovered something incredible. Her worth wasn't tied to her performance. She was enough, mistakes and all. One of the most powerful parts of Anna's transformation was her shift in how she viewed failure. When she first started therapy, failure had been something to fear and avoid at all costs. But through their work together, she came to see it as a natural and necessary part of growth. Dr. Vale remembered her words during one of their later sessions. "I always thought mistakes were proof that I wasn't good enough. But now I see they're just proof that I'm trying, and that's what matters." For Dr. Vale, those words captured the essence of overcoming perfectionism. It wasn't about eliminating fear altogether. It was about learning to live with it, to face it, and to move forward anyway. It was about embracing imperfection as part of the human experience. As he reflected on Anna's journey, Dr. Vale thought about the lessons her story could offer to others. He had seen so many patients trapped by perfectionism, each of them believing they were alone in their struggles. But Anna's story was proof that change was possible, that with the right tools and support, anyone could learn to break free from the cycle of fear. He imagined speaking directly to those who might resonate with Anna's story. If you're struggling with perfectionism, know this: you are not alone. Your fear doesn't define you, and it doesn't have to control you. Perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. Growth is. Showing up, trying, and learning. That's where the magic happens. Dr. Vale would